I think the Hungarians beat the Huns. So I'm fascinated by Hungarian ethnogenesis and anthropology, including both the scientific and the pseudoscientific origins of the Hungarian people. And among both Hungarians and foreigners, the association between the Huns and Hungary has always been extremely strong. This is because when the Hungarians first came from Central Asia to their modern home in Europe, they were warriors on horseback who conducted fierce raids against Europeans, reaching as far as even Spain. Early non-Hungarian sources mistook these Hungarians for the Huns of Attila, who caused so much destruction for the late Roman Empire. While there is a question as to whether the Hungarians had their own Hun myth prior to entry in Europe, by the 13th century, Hungarians wrote in their own chronicles that they were the descendants or relatives of Attila and his Huns. Now, this Hun affinity in Hungary has been critiqued often as a kind of national insecurity or a nostalgia for an imagined golden age. After all, post-conquest Hungarians experienced devastation and defeat under the Mongols, Ottomans, Habsburgs, lost multiple world wars, and failed revolutions. But I was talking to my friends on the Gladio Free Europe podcast, and I mentioned something that I hadn't really thought of before. But if you compare the Huns and the Hungarians, clearly outperformed the Huns in the grand scheme of history, right? The entire history of the Pannonian Basin, where Hungary is today, involved nomads invading from the east, settling down for 100 years or so, and then getting conquered by new invaders from the east. Not just the Huns and the Hungarians, but the Avars, Scythians, and more people too. But what I think is genuinely miraculous is how Hungarians are the nomadic people group from the steppe who have lived there for 1,000 years. It's impossible to understate what a huge accomplishment and honestly a historical mystery that is, because no other group even comes close. The Huns, while being super famous, barely lasted 2 generations in the Pannonian Basin before disintegrating due to attacks from the east and the power vacuum caused by Attila's death. Hungarians also experienced plenty of power vacuums and attacks by other nomads, and a lot more than that too, and yet they're still around today, speaking and being Hungarian. Like a huge success when you think about the history of that geographic location. I'd really never thought about it that way before, but I'm surprised more people don't point out how the Hungarians proved themselves far more capable of building and creating a country in the Pannonian Basin than Attila's rinky-dink Huns ever could have. So, do you agree? Well, the Huns are definitely epic. Did Hungarians kind of outperform them in, every way? And if you're interested in the history of this relationship, check out the newest episode of the Gladio Free Europe podcast, follow me on TikTok, and subscribe to my podcast too.